if that money that we blew on the world empire, but what that $20 trillion could have gone to instead, like where is our Jetsons future? They blew it killing Iraq. Ultimately, there are iron laws of the universe that inflationary money and armed force cannot prevent from taking hold. What we need is freedom. What we need is to roll back all of this state intervention in the economy. We need hard money, and we need massive deregulation to create as free a market as we possibly can. That means letting banks fail.
Mr. Scott Horton, welcome back, everyone. Scott is the author of, as you can see, many of the books back there, Provoked, Enough Already, many, many books. We will link to all here today. But Scott is an expert in the anti-war, war, money, bankers' wars, all of these different aspects that we talk about as Bitcoiners. How can we fix these things, fix these problems? So I'm just very honored to have you here today, Scott. And I could talk to you for hours, like I told you offline, but it's an honor to have you here.
Well, thanks very much. Happy to be here.
So I would love for you to just kind of give your general rundown of where you see things right now. Like we had Donald Trump come in, the Bitcoiner crowd knows that, he's coming in, he's selling this, we're going to be the Bitcoin capital of the world and all these different things. And among many other things, we're going to be national, pro-America, and we're going to take care of things at home. And it seems like anything but has happened in the last, 12, 14 months, whatever you want to call it. So could you give us a rundown, a high level of, where is Scott's mind at? What in the world is happening right now?
Well, I'm really not an expert on Bitcoin policy type things. I know that he tried to make things friendly, I don't know, probably for Bitcoin, but definitely for a lot of other shit coins and tokens and this and that other kind of things that they're pushing, that his sons are involved in and stuff. And it's a pretty big scandal, actually. There's so much news coming, in all the time, but I think it was the Qataris or the UAE, I guess it was the Qataris, had poured billions of dollars into this Trump family crypto token, just pumping it up. Like, that's just man, imagine if, Joe and Hunter Biden did that. Billions of dollars from some Arab sheik into their shit coin. Are you kidding? I mean, that's impeachable right there, quite frankly. And I hate Trump's enemies more than I hate him by a lot. You know what I mean? Don't get me wrong. I'm not like anti-Trump guy, but like, man, what about like the Teapot Dome scandal and whatever? Like, this is public corruption, man. Absolutely. And at the hands of a foreign power, any foreign power, that's just, it's so far over the line. It's like, it's kind of so shocking. Nobody knows what to do with it or something. And there's so much else going on that it kind of gets washed away. But I'm always very skeptical of like these financial instruments. Like Bitcoin is one thing, but then you get to do all these like whatever derivatives and ETFs and futures trading funds and whatever kind of things that I do not understand, but am very skeptical of. You know what I mean? Like if I had any money,
Most are.
If I had any money, a big part of it would be in Bitcoin probably, but then I don't think I'd be very adventurous with all these other kinds of things based on Bitcoins and all these other deals the way that they do, and because, Bitcoin is, well, whatever. Some people have always intended, I don't know who originally created, but some people have always intended to be, a hedge against inflation. But the point being that, we live in an inflationary environment, right? Where the government only knows how to print money and they never know how to stop. They change the rate at which they print money sometimes. And of course, license all the banks to expand the money supply as well. Right. But so then that leads to all kinds of distortions. So you can have real big booms in Bitcoin leading to real big corrections, just the same as you could in any other thing, because we're still living in the world of the US dollar. As long as the national government can force you to pay taxes and force you to pay taxes in US dollars, then they've got us all by the neck. You know what I mean? And then whatever market you're investing in, whether it's real estate or stocks or Bitcoins or any other thing, is going to be volatile, because the U.S. government's dollar is corrupt in the first place, and among maybe other causes as well, but that'll be the first cause.
Yeah, absolutely. And you're spot on. I mean, I think the promise of Bitcoin is that it's an immutable ledger. No one controls it. So that's what obviously brings a lot of people to it, like you kind of mentioned. But at the same time, the derivatives and all this stuff is the Wall Street games, right? They're going to be played on top of, what happens to gold and silver. And the difference in my mind is that gold and silver was physical. So it can't be audited, and meaning you have to trust somebody at Fort Knox. You have to trust somebody at a central bank or whatever it is. So we have no idea. It's this game of trust that is constantly being broken. And so Bitcoin is an auditing machine every 10 minutes. And so people can play funny games, but they will blow themselves up eventually. FTX was a great example of that. And that will happen. In my opinion, I think that'll happen to Chase Bank. It's going to happen to like someone like them, not them specifically, but it's going to happen to some big people in the coming years because they're funny games being played, and they will play games, and then they will get blown up. That's, neither here nor there maybe, but there's a big thing though right now too, again, and it's been for a long time, but I just saw this professor from Oklahoma, Clara Mattei. She's got this, how to escape capitalism, and talking about we need a new economic system, and et cetera, and really kind of like a Marxian Marxist student. And from my eyes, again, it's the money that we use. I go back to the Rothschilds we mentioned offline. Like, I care not who makes the nation's laws, give me the money and I control the world. And so my question for you is this: I think of JFK, where Lyndon Johnson comes in, the KYC, AML. You've spoken a lot, obviously, over the years on different pods about Iran and what's going on there now, and the genesis of all this. So I would love just kind of your thoughts of maybe the money flows, what's been happening over the last number of decades that people just don't see. They don't see the root of a lot of what's going on right now. And that's why I go back to the Trump thing at the beginning, where he's been anti-war, really one of the few people. Like, I feel weird because I'm one of the people, or I've always said Trump's been very anti-war for decades, one of the few people I know that's been consistently. And now all of a sudden, the last year, he's just been like, okay, we're bombing 8 countries and we're doing all kinds of stuff. And it's like, whoa, like, what's going on? So I would love for you to maybe unpack this a little bit and kind of what you see going on at a high level.
Yeah. All right. Well, I mean, to zoom all the way the hell out, right?
It's what you're good at.
What it is, yeah, we have what they call a mixed economy, right? So it's not a free market because there's a gigantic regime on top of it that makes huge economic choices for everyone all the time. And so then therefore, the most powerful corporations in whichever sectors have a vast interest in exerting influence on that regime so that it does what they want. I mean, if you go back and look, believe me, I ain't know any kind of Marxian, and I am not even from the left at all. I'm not saying that or whatever. But what we all learn in school, that is really the basis of the understanding. I mean, if they understand anything about it at all, this is what like Washington, D.C. thinks is kind of what they taught me in 7th grade, which was that the wild excesses of free market capitalism had caused the crash of 29 and the Great Depression. Mm-hmm. And the lesson from that was you needed the Democrats in there to make decisions through the democracy in order to smooth out the excesses and to prevent the boom and bust. Now, that's totally wrong. And of course, anyone with any, experience in Austrian school economics, or really probably a lot of different schools of capitalist economics, can tell you that for one reason or another, even like the Chicago school guys get this kind of wrong. Milton Friedman got this kind of wrong, but he's still somewhat on the right track when he's saying, pointing out that the Federal Reserve was created back in 1914, signed into law in 1913, created in 1914. And they had produced the bubble. The government's control over the currency, and especially through the New York Fed, had pushed the bubble in 27 through 29 that ended up crashing. And as David Stockman points out, by the time Franklin Roosevelt even was sworn in March of 1933, the Great Depression was already over. The crash was over. All the bad debts had been cleared. Now, you still had the problem of the Dust Bowl and things like that. But overall, like, the financial panic was over. And then the Democrats came in and started tinkering with everything, taking control of everything. And that's what prolonged the Depression until through the end of the Second World War, basically. So the way that they teach it in school is all wrong, but it's completely and widely accepted. I mean, Newt Gingrich was asked, the leader of the Republican right-wing revolution in the 90s was asked, who's the greatest president? And he said, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, right? So this is, the consensus of the entire left and the right. When Eisenhower came to power, he did not undo the Roosevelt-Truman administration. I mean, he scaled back some things, but basically he solidified the state's gains, the national government's gains in control over the economy through the New Deal and World War II period. And so we've been living with that ever since. And so if you think about whether it's banking, and believe me, all the individuals are responsible for their own actions here. If people are doing the wrong thing, they're doing the wrong thing. I'm not saying that, but to look at it systemically, if you're in banking, or if you're in farming, or if you're in biomedicals, or you're in whatever it is, then state capture is your job, right? Like, you have to devote a huge part of your budget to hiring lobbyists to go and one, defend your interests in Washington, but then secondly, screw the other guy if you can, right? And so that's why, when I was a kid, Ross Perot ran for president, and he goes, the problem is the special interests. And I remember what the hell does that mean, the special interests? and he should have delineated it more often. Bankers, oil men, arms merchants, drug companies, agribusiness. These guys are gangsters, and America is a quasi-free market state. Oh, I know what I was going to say earlier. In school, they taught you communism is when the government owns everything. Fascism is when there's private property, but the government tells you what to do with it all the time, right? And then the trick is really that big business owns the government, and they like it that way. And they use the government to tell everyone else what to do and protect their own interest, right? So that's what we're talking about. The politicization of economic interests everywhere. So now we're at the point where blam, Jeffrey Epstein's emails. You got X-ray eyes right into exactly how it is. Look, it's the Prince of Great Britain emailing this guy and going, hey, guess what? The trade deal is going through. The bailout has been approved. Get in on this action before anyone else in the world knows, And so this is what, if you were new here, you would say, oh, well, I see. This is all corruption, right? How could you run? Seriously, man, come on. Yeah. You buy ownership stake with all your Bitcoin wealth in an aluminum smelting firm. Now you got mining operations, you got guys to pay, you got lawyers to hire, you've got aluminum to smelt, you've got all of this stuff. And this is all within the law. There's 10,000 laws and 100,000 regulations about how you do this business. And so you are engaged with your congressman and you are engaged with your executive regulator all day, every day. You have no choice really, but to be completely built in with the state. And of course, an aluminum smelter could poison his community if you let him. So maybe, there's argument for regulation of one kind or another there, but you see what I mean, that the bigger the government, the more mixed the economy, the more you're talking about what, the economist Robert Higgs, in order to try to prevent provoking an emotional reaction from you, maybe he goes, well, it's a participatory fascism, right? So you call it a fascism with a lowercase f. There's still political parties. You could be the justice of the peace, right? It is government of the people, by the people, blah, blah, blah. But boy, does it have a hell of a lot of power to influence everything that anybody does with their property. And so then next thing you know, we're bombing Iran because you have Lockheed and Northrop Grumman and Boeing will pour millions, tens, hundreds of millions of dollars into a bunch of think tanks run by a bunch of Likudnik, Israel Firster neoconservatives who write the studies to justify the wars that necessitate the purchase of Lockheed products, right? This is their business. This is, the merchants of death. You mentioned War is a Racket by Smedley Butler. He was talking about all the economic interests that were sending him on these errands to and fro, but also the guys who are making the weapons and saying, man, we need errands for you guys to run so that we can keep making these weapons. I grew up, even just from the time I was a little boy, I just heard kind of tell of this, rumor of this, that this was a huge part of the Vietnam War, was they had to drop all the bombs so that they could buy more bombs, so that they could. The cart before the horse, the system upside down. Not Congress tells arms companies, listen, we need to buy this many munitions from you because the military under the command of the elected president say they need this much. No, it's not. It's, General, what do I got to do to get a shiny new tank in your driveway this afternoon, buddy? You know what I mean? It's demand, it's a supply driven thing. The same as, look, if you sold tanks, you only have one market, the Pentagon. And so, you're trying to get rid of tanks, but it's tax money that they're spending. And so they're completely corrupt and bribable. And they have no bottom line that they're trying to protect. If anything, they're trying to spend every last penny they got and more is their mission. And then all you got to do is buy them a steak dinner or two, even on the lightest touch level. And you get your tanks sold. And then you just end up having huge tank manufacturing firms that have an interest in having a fleet of think tankers and a fleet of lobbyists who take congressmen and military men out to dinner. And that's their job. You know what I mean? That really is a huge part of it too. Like you just know that from the anecdotes that you hear about the thing. Why do they have all these super expensive 5-star restaurants in Washington and whatever? There you go there, and there are the lobbyists feeding the very finest steak to the senator and saying, I'm so glad that we're such good friends. You don't even need Jeffrey Epstein to take them to the island most of the time. You know what I mean? This is just how business is done. So that's
those are the ones that could be bribed.
Exactly. That's the very, very long kind of 30,000-foot answer to the thing is the American Republic is corrupt. It is turned into an evil empire abroad and at home. And, you know, as Dr. Paul has always said, probably the only way it's ever going to change is when the dollar breaks and people just give up on confidence in the government's currency because they're just completely unrestrained in how they spend it. And, you know, I can't predict when, but I can predict that he's right about that. He's been right about everything since. And I remember Dr. Paul on the radio in 2002 saying, man, we shouldn't be doing these wars. We need to save this money. We need to husband these resources. We can't afford all this. And they were going, oh, blah, 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 fight terror. And he goes, let me tell you what's going to happen, okay? All you baby boomers out there listening to this, you'll still get your Social Security check. It just won't be worth anything. And then, so that's what happened, right? That's why people are desperate now is because they and their parents blew their wad killing Iraqis for Israel, right? And Syrians and Libyans and Somalis, Afghans, not so much for Israel, but still Afghans too, Pakistanis. And they just, you know, the American empire blew the American people's wad. And here they are, as we're recording this, we are apparently, I don't want to be too committed to the future prediction here. I don't know exactly what's going to happen, but we are apparently on the absolute eve of war with Iran, where America is making absolutely unreasonable demands that, you know, could be written by Madeleine Albright, made to be rejected, and which is how they started the war in Kosovo in 1999 by giving Slobodan Milosevic a deal he could not possibly accept. Well, here they're telling the Iranians essentially completely disarm from your conventional missile capability, completely give up your civilian enrichment program, which we know, and they know, Washington knows they are not going to do. And they've got, as the Wall Street Journal put it, the biggest collection of forces in the region since 2003. So, you know, even when Obama was bombing Libya, it doesn't count compared to what they've built up there now. Now, it's only 2 carriers. You know, in the first Gulf War, they had, I don't know, more than that. I don't know the number. And for Iraq War II, they had a huge buildup of ground forces in Kuwait before the war, you know, which just goes to show right there, right, that they knew that Saddam couldn't even reach out and touch them in Kuwait, much less in the United States of America, for God's sake. They're such liars. But anyway, so that's what it is. America is corrupt and evil. And oh, did I leave out? I didn't really, but I kind of only implied it without stipulating specifically that I really should have. When it comes to foreign policy, the foreign governments' lobbies in Washington then are ultra powerful, whether it's the British or the Israelis or the Saudis or now apparently the Qataris as well, to a great degree, not to like give a bunch of extra credit to the war parties, you know, pro-Israel lobbies narrative about Qatar. That's a bunch of crap, but they are, you know, spending as much influence as they can here. And then in the end, Congress and the president, they really take into account the foreign government's point of view far more than the American people, right? Like on foreign policy questions in Washington, the American people's interests aren't represented. It's the Saudis and the Israelis and the Brits get up there and argue about what is America going to do or not, you know? And the American people are an afterthought. We're just here to pay for it all. We're just here, you know, so you can send your brother off to get killed in one of these things. You know, it's the empire.
Yeah, and it's you know, the you know, I don't know, everyone has a different name for it, right? You know, the fourth turnings, all the cliches, the late stage republic, late stage capitalism, late stage managerialism. Like I've heard so many different terms, right? But it does feel like we're not, you know, now the piper's getting paid, where it's we have the world reserve currency, the Triffin dilemma. All these things are coming home to roost now, and we got to live through it. Like you read about these things in history books and these things happening, but you don't think it's ever going to happen to you. Like any of these things you read about in history, like, okay, like that's great. That's history. Like, no. This is what's happening. Like that's the exact same thing.
In the 1990s, when everybody else thought, wow, this is great. This is as good as it gets. I saw all this coming way back then, man. I was always negative on it. I never believed in it. I always just saw this as the calm before the storm. Everybody's living like in this Jerry Seinfeld's world or whatever, but like, oh man, here come the Bushes and the empire, and it's going to be bad.
Mhm.
And I still am the world's absolute worst Bill Clinton hater, but still, he
How do
wasn't
you,
gonna
Scott? I mean,
he wasn't gonna invade Iraq the way W. Bush was absolutely certain to. And I saw that coming years and years ahead, the whole terror wars and all the bankruptcy, all the police state, all the surveillance stuff. Like I was reading about the National Security Agency and how they wanted to put transponders in everybody's cars, tax you by the mile and all that in like 1993. So I was like, the New World Order's coming, and this isn't exactly it, but it's pretty close, I guess.
Get dang close.
The American, it's what I had wrong was that the world government was coming for us when it's Washington is the world government. But of course, that same empire is a domestic empire too, and it's pretty thorough and pretty brutal here at home as well. But it's just not foreigners dictating it against us, really.
It's jarring when you realize that, like, the IMF, International Monetary Fund, for those who don't know, right? It's like that's based here. Like you think of like, oh, that's in Brussels, or like that's in somewhere. It's like no, that's here. All these things, like so.
UN headquarters right there in Washington, right there in New York.
Exactly. Yeah, thank you. That was the other one I was thinking of. Yep, there you go.
Yeah, and so John D. Jr. was like, "Hey, Dad, we want to donate this land to the United Nations." They're like, "Okay."
Yeah, there you go. Woodrow Wilson, the boys, the Rockefellers, and so, so this leads me perfectly to my next question, which is like, it makes me think of one of your writings, which is The Fool's Errand, and like separating money from state. We did the separation of church and state. People are still argue about that. I know there's still arguments about that of how we were actually founded. That's another story for a different day. But separation. But now we need to separate education and state. We need to separate money and state. How do we the funding mechanisms of enabling these people to just, again, the Rothschild thing from 400 years ago of like, I don't care who makes the nation's laws. If I control the money, I control the world. How do we get people to care about history? Like all the things that are, you have so much in your head, how do we get back? The train is so far off the tracks. Like you said, and maybe that's the answer. And that's kind of where I was going with this next one is like just Max Payne. Like you said, the dollar collapsing. I mean, Ron Paul's talked about this for decades. I mean, there's people out there that have seen this, but the average person just doesn't care at all. They're distracted. We're in the Coliseum, completely distracted from what's going on. Is it just Max Payne that, is that how we transition from this?
All right, real talk for a second. We all know health insurance is basically a fiat system of healthcare. The biggest debauchery there is. It's expensive, confusing. Somehow you still end up paying hundreds of dollars for a Band-Aid. We moved to crowd sharing almost 5 years ago. It's the best decision we ever made. Instead of sending your money to the insurance company's black hole, you join a like-minded community that directly funds each other's medical bills. Simple, transparent, way cheaper, and that difference you save, you can invest in Bitcoin. It's an amazing win-win. And look, we're part of the Bitcoin community because we believe in freedom, decentralization. Crowd Health brings that same mindset to healthcare. You choose your doctor, you pay in cash, and the community's got your back when the big bills hit. No networks, no middlemen, no bureaucrats trying to approve your care. Just people helping people the way it should be. You make decisions about your health. That's as sovereign as it gets. So if you're ready to take the orange pill for your health, this open enrollment, go to Join Crowd Health to get started for $99 for your first 3 months using code Brandon at joincrowdhealth.com. That's joincrowdhealth.com, code Brandon. Crowd Health is not insurance. Opt out. Take your power back. This is how we win. Generational wealth doesn't happen by accident. Bitcoin fixed the money, but it didn't fix the system of protecting and passing it on. Bitcoiners, we have to live in two different worlds, idealism versus pragmatism. That's where Meanwhile comes in. It's the world's first Bitcoin-denominated life insurance company, regulated in Bermuda and built entirely by Bitcoiners for Bitcoiners. With Meanwhile, long-term holders can grow and protect their Bitcoin wealth through tax-free policy loans, no repayment obligation, no margin call risk, while making inheritance simple and secure and entirely in Bitcoin. It's about sovereignty, stewardship, and building a legacy that lasts centuries. Because if Bitcoin is forever, your plan should be too. Learn more and sign up with code 4QPBWC at meanwhile.bm. That's meanwhile.bm, code 4QPBWC, or just sign up. The link in the description below.
First of all, one correction. It was Nelson that said to Junior, we got to give him the land for the UN. Not Junior that said that to Senior. It was the grandson that said that to the son. Okay, so neoliberalism is essentially like this horrible kind of funhouse mirror horror movie version of libertarianism, right? So like if New Deal socialism went way too far, then there was a push to the right that said, whoa, okay, we're going to keep some of the welfare state and the regulatory state, but we don't want to just become completely socialist here anymore. But then, so where does that leave us? Look, that leaves us with essentially Bill Clintonian economics, right? Post-Cold War, what Bill Clinton called free markets and democracy, which is the same corrupt mixed economy empire that we were just describing, right? And so that basic way of looking at things, that Clintonian kind of view, what they called the third way at the time, you can be a Democrat and not be too much of a commie kind of thing. That sort of view has been the dominant sort of liberal, moderate center. When we say liberal, that doesn't mean far left on the spectrum. That's where the socialists are and stuff. Liberal means very kind of center left, right? Hillary Clinton is a liberal, right? Not a Marxist. But then so is George W. Bush, right? Whatever you want to call George W. Bush's conservatism, he was essentially conserving modern sort of post-New Deal, post-World War II liberalism, Bill Clintonian free markets and democracy, blah, blah, blah. This watered down ass version of real freedom, of real, Americanism, right? And the worst part of it, right, is so here you have these liberals have made their peace with capitalism. They're not socialists. They don't want to nationalize the means of production. Now, they're very bad welfare status and regulatory status, and you don't want them teaching your kids things because they're bad at that. And, but they're not really commies. They've made their peace with capitalism. But then what does that mean in practice, right? It means not that they're ideological libertarians who would be perfectly happy to see Lockheed go out of business if they can't produce goods and services for the market that demands it, right? They're not that. They're liberals. They're this horror movie funhouse version of what American freedom is supposed to be. And so what does that mean? It means not that they've made their peace with capitalism in terms of like a libertarian understanding of how free markets are supposed to work, the profits and losses, the due punishments that big business has to suffer sometimes when they do things wrong and all that. They don't believe in any of that. It just means that they've made their peace with big business. It means they're corrupt. What was Bill Clinton's third way? It was let's go to Wall Street and sell the hell out, right? That was the idea of it. And then what does that mean? Ultimately, it means we're always at war. It means imperialism. And if you look at the modern American population moves further and further to the left and to the right, it's because the centrists have not been libertarian at all. And in fact, they haven't been moderate at all. They have been extremists, centrist extremists, doing insane things like overthrowing the entire Middle East and killing a few million people and blowing like $10 trillion, completely disgracing our country and completely corrupting our economy and all of these things the way that they have. So if you think about the American political center as it's existed since the end of the Cold War, and it's just Bush's and Clinton's and Biden and McCain, those guys, their view, that consensus, Barack Obama was nothing but Bill Clinton, right? That view has completely been discredited because on one hand, all the wars, and then two, all of the financial crises that have come from all their corruption, from the COVID lockdowns as well, and all the inflation that they created after that. They talk about the war at home and the empire at home. All of us living like Afghans for a year, asking permission to go outside. So they are, and the media that has covered for them as well represents that exact sort of Clintonian, W. Bushian centrist view, right? And then, but they got to lie about everything because everything that they're doing is wrong. Everything they're doing is corrupt. All the wars are wars that they start. And a lot of times on behalf of foreign interests, like the effing Israelis and all of this stuff, And so the people are just turning completely against the center. But then who do they have to turn to? Dr. Paul's retired. Now, he does a great show with Dan McAdams every day, the Liberty Report, and he's still great on everything and whatever. But we have a dearth of leadership who can explain to people that, look, man, we don't need you liberals and leftists. We don't need socialism as the cure to this. And for right wingers, we don't need a new national economic plan by the Republicans in order to restore manufacturing to its proper, price and role in the society, whatever. What we need is freedom. What we need is to roll back all of this state intervention in the economy. We need hard money and we need massive deregulation and to create as free a market as we possibly can. And that does mean, unlike what Bush and Clinton and Obama would do, that means letting banks fail when they have to fail. That means allowing real corrections in the market, no special favors, no special interests, and a huge part of why we have such consolidation in so many markets in the country is also because of all the inflationary money. There's a thing called the Cantillon effects, which is named after the guy who got it right, where the people who get access to the easy new credit and new money first, they get it at today's price. They end up paying their employees in next week's price, you know? And so what happens is, in the broad scheme of things, the way that happens is the mass financialization of the entire economy. And then with all of that easy finance, then the consolidation of massive industries so that you have fewer and fewer competitors in all these markets, where that might happen to a degree in a free market anyway, where you have mergers and bankruptcies and assets get bought up, and it makes sense to have fewer competitors in some markets. But here you have essentially, because of the government's essentially licensure of the banks to artificially expand credit, you have the biggest kind of companies can get the most credit to just buy everybody else up. And then, in fact, of course, as I know you and your audience are aware, that same inflationary monetary policy causes not just the inflation that we all suffer, but it causes the massive boom and bust. But then it's the smallest guys that go bust, and the biggest guys then get to consolidate and buy up all of their stuff each time we go through the cycle as well, right? And consolidate at the top. So there's so much about the monopolization and the corruption of our economy that is due to having this so-called elastic monetary system, you know, this inflationary monetary system. So my real fear is that, you know, we're going to have severely economically illiterate Marxist types who, after all, like, why does Marxism ever convince anyone of anything, right? It's like Christianity. It promises to save even the lowest man, right? It promises to bring anyone up to the level of good. And when people can see that they're being treated unfairly, then that's a beautiful siren song. Well, let's just exploit the exploiters right back, eat the rich. You know what I mean? Instead of, how about let's just not have a system that artificially consolidates power in those who are artificially, or those who are already wealthy in the first place, but still allow a free market to exist for everybody else. Instead, it's like dog eat dog for the little guy, but socialism for the rich. And that kind of system then ends up breeding demand for socialism for the poor too, and for everybody else too, which is not what you want, because then you're just getting more of the same and worse, right? And then, but also the same way where you have right-wingers say that you just can't trust, you know, you'll even hear my buddy Tucker Carlson go, oh, libertarianism has destroyed the American economy. And there's a kernel of truth in that, right? Where, like, again, it's this funhouse mirror version of our ideology of free markets, right? Where you get Newt Gingrich, the guy who said that Franklin Roosevelt was the greatest American president. He's the guy who goes, yeah, what we need is real free markets, which mostly means, kind of has meant, deregulating crime, right? Like really letting, even Ron Paul, for example, in the late 1990s, Bill Clinton signed a law repealing Glass-Steagall, and it had been backed by Phil Gramm, who beat Ron in the primary for Senate in the 80s, unfortunately, and became a senator after that. And he was a very free market guy, but he was more of a Chicago guy. He wasn't an Austrian. He wasn't a real libertarian. He was a right-winger and a corrupt one. And so Phil Gramm's bill said that by repealing Glass-Steagall, that meant that they could take regular Joe's deposits and gamble them on Wall Street, right? Take your pension fund and put it in the housing bubble, this kind of crap, which before had been forbidden. And here Ron Paul is the most free market man who ever lived and who ever had a position in the U.S. House of Representatives, period. And he opposed this repeal. He said, you can't repeal Glass-Steagall that keeps a lid on the corruption while you still have an artificial money machine expanding the money supply all the time. Because what's going to happen is you're going to still have a boom bust system, only now there's going to be no protection for the little guy getting their pension rated and that kind of thing. And so he was saying, absolutely repeal Glass-Steagall after you institute a gold standard, then repeal Glass-Steagall. Have an absolutely free market, but you need hard money first. You need real property rights first. What Phil Gramm and Bill Clinton were doing was just legalizing corruption. And they were right. And that was a, you know, the damn Democrats will say that's what caused the 2008 crash. That's not true, but it did cause a lot of pension funds to be lost in it. It did cause a lot of regular people to lose everything in it who otherwise would not have. And that much is true and predicted by the most free market guy, the Austrian school economist in the U.S. Congress, Dr. Paul.
Where does the game theory come in for you? Like Jason Lowery wrote the software thesis, the Bitcoin power projection thing, the MIT Space Force guy a couple years ago. And then you have this real power projection, and this it goes into these economic or like political class discussions, but power projection and defending your homeland versus the expeditionary adventures we seem to just constantly go on because of the Triffin dilemma, because we have the world reserve currency, we're the world's policeman, all these stuffs. Because over the years, I get a lot of people that are like, well, these are our interests. Like we have to go around the world because what if they come here? Like, again, Ukraine, all these things, like Russia is going to expand and they're going to, like, where is your dividing line or red line on like what is America's interest and what is not? Because like no one can seem to agree on what is in America's interest or not. Is it just staying at home and waiting till someone comes here and beat down your door, then we stand up and fight? Or is it going out there and we're gonna secure the lanes of the sea? Like where in your mind does that intersect, and do you put the line in the sand?
Well, I'm with Smedley Butler that the national government, and really this is their only mandate in the Constitution, is to defend the American people's lives and liberty. Mm-hmm. There's no authorization for a world empire in the Constitution at all. And I'm against the idea
I missed that one.
America's interests as defined by whichever president get to define whatever they do in the world without any moral or legal restraint. Whatever they think is in America's interest, that's wrong. And I'm not like a big pro-UN and collective security guy. That doesn't mean I am for the law of the jungle and dog eat dog and empires all versus each other and let's have world wars and just kill and steal and whatever. That's absolutely not the way America's supposed to be doing business in the world at all. And so what they will do, back to Smedley Butler, he's like, why am I invading the Dominican Republic? It's because there's this one agricultural interest that wants all the money and all the resources from the Dominicans and for them to not get any of it. And so I got to use this brute force. Now you could say, well, but Scott, that's adding like tens of thousands of dollars to America's GDP next year.
And that's the argument.
But come on. Yeah, what you're talking about is a narrow special interest. It's costing us all much more than that to send our socialized cost Marine Corps down there to do the dirty work, right? Look at Dick Cheney. When he's the CEO of Halliburton, he's going, we should lift these sanctions against Iraq and Iran, and we should figure out how to do business with these countries. Once he's vice president, and he has a Marine Corps that he can use at no cost to himself whatsoever, at only pure benefit to his investors, he gets to go from the company he just ran to opening up America's treasury for them to just reach right in and take whatever they want and send the armed forces to go and do dirty work that he could have never raised the money for. I think Halliburton could have raised money on the free market to hire some mercenaries to go over there and overthrow Saddam Hussein and install the Ayatollahs guys in power instead. Nope. But he can do it, when he has America essentially at his beck and call, which that was only one part of the reason for that war, but it was part of it. Cheney's financial interests and his friends' financial interests in it all.
So where's the red line between where's our interest? People protecting
I say screw interest. No, self-defense. That's it. And look, when people say, and believe me, I heard this my whole life too. Well, if it wasn't us, it'd be Russia. If it wasn't us, it would be China. But what is the evidence for that? It's just nonsense. I mean, the reality is, look, we lived through the 20th century, or our parents did and grandparents did, where there was such a thing as Hitler and Stalin, right? But there's nothing like that now. There's nothing like an ideological conquest, ideological contest for control of the world. I mean, that's just not what's happening here. You take a look at whatever, every power on earth, America, Britain, France, Germany, Poland, if you want to count them, I guess they're sort of a medium-sized economy. The Russians, the Japanese, the Koreans, everybody is a center-leftist or a center-rightist. There's no hardcore communists and no fascists, no avowed fascists in power anywhere in the world except in the armed forces of Ukraine, backed by the United States right now, which is sort of a smaller issue. But there's just nothing like what was going on where, I mean, think of the change that would be required in Japan for them to all of a sudden switch back to the unlimited appetite for conquest from the early 20th century. It's just not going to happen. It's just not.
It's 180 degrees. Yeah.
And the Russians have nukes, but they don't have manpower and they don't have wealth. It would make no sense whatsoever for them. If anybody thinks like a risk board, well, if Moscow could just march through Warsaw and on Berlin, then that would just be a net gain. They would just steal all of that great money and wealth for themselves, and it would be nothing but in Russia's interest to try to rule all of Eastern Europe. Yeah, no, I don't think that. And not only do I not think that, I don't think anyone in power in Russia thinks that either. That's completely stupid. No, they're not going to do that. And in fact, as we can see in their war in Ukraine, they cannot do that. I don't even know if they could whoop Lithuania. Well, I guess they could, but they certainly are not rolling to Warsaw. Just forget it. It's completely preposterous, right? The same thing, people say China wants to take over the world. Obviously, they are a major power. They got 1 billion people and high technology and all these things. But they also have 15 nations surrounding them. 15. Is it 14 or 16? Right dang around there. They're completely surrounded by nation states. Now, they could embark on some, again, imagine Imperial Japan in the early 20th century, in the 1930s and 40s, just trying to conquer everything. They could go completely wild and try that. But does that make any sense for them to try to spend trillions and trillions and trillions of dollars fighting everyone, fighting Vietnam, fighting Korea, fighting Japan, fighting Australia, fighting, which would mean the United States and Britain as well, fighting Pakistan and China and Tajikistan. And then they want to build a belt and road. This is their imperial plan, is to build a highway and a railroad and a fiber optic line from Shanghai to Lisbon, right? And they're going to do that by starting a giant war against all the wild Muslims of Central Asia, by going in there and killing them all and inflicting a violent world empire on them all at the cost of however many $1 trillion that would cost for China to try to conquer Tajikistan. Or no, they're not doing that. Don't be stupid, man. There's just no evidence in the world that they're doing that. There's no reason to think they're doing that. China has never tried to invade and dominate Japan, ever, right? Like, this is maybe the original Japanese emigrated from there back in time immemorial or whatever. But anyway, so instead, if America's empire just went poof, right? Bewitched wiggles her nose and the American empire comes home, then so what? Full-scale war breaks out in East Asia. Why? I mean, right now, Japan doesn't have nukes, and a big part of that is because, obviously, they have American promises of protection. But if that ended, and we brought all our troops home, and we said, listen, Japan, you're going to have to figure out things with the Chinese yourself. Does that automatically mean that they're just immediately going to make atom bombs? Or even if they did, that would mean immediately an aggressive posture versus Beijing? Or just, hey, listen, Beijing, we're going to go ahead and make 15 just to make sure you don't attack us, but like, whatever. There's not that kind of tension between them now. I mean, they got some islands in dispute and whatever, but nobody thinks that China's coming. Nobody thinks that, boy, good thing, or nobody over there really thinks, boy, it's a good thing America promises to use H-bombs on China if they attack Japan, because otherwise we all accept that China would be on their way to sack Tokyo this minute. Like, nuh-uh. Right? Same for, at the end of the Cold War, I was a teenager at the time, but obviously I was the type to be very interested in this kind of thing. At the end of the Cold War, there's all this hype that, oh no, Germany and Japan are going to come back and create the world empire. That's what we got. We got to stay in Europe to prevent the return of Germany to world hegemony. I mean, think of how silly that sounds now. You know what I mean? Like, that just was never in the cards. And it isn't because George Bush and Bill Clinton prevented it. It's because that was not happening. That was not, if the Germans had wanted to kick us right the hell out of their country, they could have, right? I mean, Bill Clinton was not going to kill them and say absolutely not. If they had demanded we leave, we'd have left. Well, we might have assassinated a couple of dudes, but probably not, So, but they had no interest in doing that. The Germans actually wanted us there because they thought, you know what? It prevents a big contest for dominance in Europe if America is dominant in Europe. And we also have nothing to fight about anyway. You know what I mean? So they actually accepted American hegemony at the time, more or less anyway, right? Not entirely, but so I would just encourage people, put aside the cliches about, oh, well, if it wasn't us, it'd be somebody else. Put that aside for a minute and just spin the globe and look at it. There are no powers in Latin America anywhere. Brazil is the biggest powerhouse economy they got. They have no navy and they have no ambition to dominate their neighbors at all, much less us, right? Forget that. There are no powers in Africa. The only country in Africa that matters at all is Egypt because of the Suez Canal. Okay? Other than that, doesn't matter. Doesn't matter. You have some, whatever. Again, special interests might have some mining rights that they're interested in somewhere. But overall, America's safety is determined by what happens in Africa? False. Right? No. Every country in Europe is our friend, including Russia. You know, Vladimir Putin still calls us our American partners. And the thing is, it's not just that he's kissing our ass. You know what it is? What he might be referring to is the fact that we still put American astronauts in space on Russian rockets flying Ukrainian motors to get our guys up to the space station up there. Right? They are our partners. Wow. They are not the goddamn godless commie Soviet Union. It's red, white, and blue Republican Russia. Who is Vladimir Putin? He's a center-right conservative. He's not a right-wing nationalist. He's not a racialist. He's not a radical or a revolutionary in any way. He's right on your center-right in your political spectrum, right? Maybe a 1990s Republican as far as that goes, right? And then, again, the Chi-Coms. You can say whatever you want about how much you don't like Chairman Xi. He's obviously very ambitious for a Chinese premier. We haven't had one like him in a while, but at the same time, he's only going to be there for a while. And at the same time, he's got plenty of his own problems. And I'm not the type who's predicting Chinese collapse. I know some people like to say that. They got billions of people and tons of high tech and all of that. But they also don't have any rivers in the western half of their country, which is vast. You know what I mean? And again, they're just completely surrounded by countries that I'm not saying are enemies, but just they have to have as intricate a foreign policy as we choose to have. You know what I mean? I mean, seriously, they have to deal with Vietnam and Thailand and Myanmar and Nepal and India and Bangladesh, Pakistan, Tajikistan, Kazakhstan, Outer Mongolia, as well as Korea and Japan, the Philippines, and the United States, Indonesia. That's a lot of foreign policies with just being the which after all, like China has been in this more or less same empire for 1,000 years or whatever anyway, right? Like it's already an empire. But who says they have an appetite to rule all Eurasia? That they even would ever think to do that it's in their tradition to do that. In fact, as Colonel McGregor points out, they don't have a big tradition of honoring their military as like, oh, our high idle soldiers, sort of the way that we build up our military forces. They know military forces mostly as, you know, oppressors and ineffectual rulers and whatever. They don't have this, they don't hold them in this high esteem where the ribbons and honors all mean so much. It's not part of their culture in that way. And so, you know, might they take Taiwan? Sure. But Taiwan's not a country. Taiwan is, you know, more or less a part of China and recognized by American policy as part of China for 50 years. So even if Chairman Xi attacks Taiwan tomorrow, which he might, and which America can't do anything about, really, we have no ability to defend that island. If that does happen, that still doesn't mean that they're coming to the Philippines and Japan next, or to Turkestan or whatever. It doesn't mean that they're doing that at all. So I think this is the uncomfortable reality, right? Is that everybody's been wrong this whole time to support all this stupid stuff. I was reminded this morning for some stupid reason. I don't know why it came up. There was a guy on Twitter got all mad at me because I said the CIA was lying when they said Saddam had all these weapons and we had to attack him. But then look at my confirmation bias. I'll turn right around and cite the CIA when the CIA says that Iran is not making nukes, and so therefore we don't need to attack them. And he goes, see, you're just confirmation bias. And I'm like, well, I mean, okay, maybe a little, but like they were lying the first time, lying us into war, and they were truthing the second time, truthing us out of war. So like, I'm sorry, but they were right in 2007 when they said Iran wasn't making nukes. You know how I know that? They still don't have any nukes. Or if they're working on one now, it's only since last June. but they'd have a whole grip by now, don't you think, if they were making them back in 2007? So that's not my confirmation bias. It's that they were lying the first time and they were telling the truth the second time. But then you see the real problem here, right? Is the guy on Twitter who was mad at me. He fell for the lie the first time and he opposed the truth the second time. He disbelieved them when they told the truth about Iran the second time. So he's mad at me for my confirmation bias when actually he was just wrong. And what kind of an idiot do you got to be to believe George W. Bush and the CIA when they say Iraq is amassing weapons to attack us with? And then what kind of idiot must you have been in 2007 to say, well, the CIA and the entire National Intelligence Council, they must be lying that Iran is not making nukes because I heard that on the radio news and I like it. Well, yeah, see, the problem isn't me and my confirmation bias. The problem is you spent your whole life believing lies told by liars who have nothing but contempt for you. And now you have to grapple with that. That's what it is. There are no dangers out there. To quote the great Bill Hicks in the year 1992, there's no one out there except, and then the joke is, well, geez, Bill, what about all the countries we arm first? And then they become a problem. Yeah, okay, sure, fine. But we sell them the old stuff and then we use the new stuff on them. So it's not really a threat, is it?
There's one thing more important than Bitcoin: the time you have and the people and relationships you build. In a world full of noise, the real signal is meeting with other Bitcoiners IRL, finding Bitcoin-only events, connecting face-to-face, and supporting the circular economy through Bitcoin-friendly merchants around the world. That's exactly what Club Orange is built for. Build your circle. Support Bitcoin-only companies. The only place in the world you can find all that in one spot is the Club Orange app on iOS or Android. Go to cluborange.org, what used to be the Orange Pill app, or scan the code here. Everything you are learning in this episode is completely moot and does not matter if you hold Bitcoin and are still leaving it on an exchange or sharing keys and your KYC information with a third party. This is your wake-up call now. You are only self-sovereign if you alone hold the keys to your wealth. 100% self-custody sounds daunting at first. Believe me, I lost 2 years of massive gains over a decade ago because I was worried about taking the few minutes it took to understand self-custody. And that's exactly why you need to talk to my friends, Tony Yazbek and his team at the Bitcoin Way. We just interviewed Tony recently, has over 80,000 views, an overwhelming response. People love his story and the simplicity he shares of how easy it is to custody and take ownership of the greatest money we've ever seen. They'll train you to do it right the first time. Head on over to thebitcoinway.com/Brandon to schedule a free 30-minute consultation today. Their 5-star rated service is exactly what you need. Quit sitting on your hands like I did and get started today. Again, that's thebitcoinway.com/BRANDON.
It's like the Vickers family, right? Selling ammunition to both sides, World War I, all this stuff. I mean, it's just incredible. I guess maybe a quick follow-up question on that. Where do you, it kind of goes along the lines of all this what I asked you to let us down this path, I guess, which is there's no one out there. This goes back to the power projection, because obviously there's people in the world. You mentioned, World War I, World War II, there's despots and dictators that throughout time, there's Genghis Khans of the world, there's emperors in Rome. Like, where is that delineation for you? Again, is it really just like, again, if someone's beating down your door on your borders, that's when a nation is like, okay, it's time to get up and get after it? Or like, how do you kind of see that playing out? Because or just identifying, hey, this is an actual threat. Like you said, hey, there's no one out there, there's no boogeyman out there, but at what times are there an actual boogeyman out there?
I'm very Ron Pauly, non-interventionist, on essentially intervening anywhere. Like, on one hand, I kind of think, geez, I don't know, man, if Russia moved into Canada or if China really moved in force into Mexico, maybe I would be in support of intervention then, but I don't know. The British ruled Canada for 150 years or something, and we didn't have to go to war against them when the British ruled Canada. It wasn't an independent country for most of our history, I think, or half of it or so. And then Mexico was ruled by Spain. And so what? Like, I don't know. Probably like in the modern context, yes, if Russia was moving into Canada, that would be essentially designed as aggression against us. There's, even in the hypothetical, that has to be what is going on there. So do we hold the line at Ottawa? Maybe. But you know what? Like, there's a great comparison here to the way America treats Ukraine, where Ukraine is Russia's Canada. It's this extremely important country to them, right on their border, and where our attitude is that they have no sphere of influence there whatsoever. They have no right to tell us that we can't even intervene to change the government there and support a government against their interests there. And, no nation, America's official policy is they do not recognize any nation, no matter how powerful in the world, any sphere of influence in any kind of neighboring region or anything like that, except for us. Our sphere of influence is the entire sphere, and we will determine everything for everyone, and no one else may determine a damn thing for themselves. But if the Russians did in Canada what we did in Ukraine, overthrow the government there twice in 10 years, threaten to kick us out of our naval bases, that kind of thing, and using Nazis to do the street putsch and all that, we would roll tanks right in there. There's just no question. They complained about Putin started backing a low-level insurgency in the East back then. Barack Obama would have rolled America's entire armored force into Canada to conquer them and drive the sock puppet pro-Russian regime out of there if there was ever such a thing. You know what I mean? And so, but by the way, see, what's fun about that, right, is when you do that hypothetical, doesn't that sound completely stupid? And I know, and every single person who listens to your show knows that Russia would never move into Canada and dare to challenge us in that kind of a hypothetical manner for anytime in the next 500 years. So long until whatever, maybe I don't know the time limit on it, but after this civilization is gone, right? After this one falls, then they might consider it. But as long as the Pentagon exists, I don't think they would even consider the idea. It wouldn't even occur to them to try it. Think about the opportunity cost, just especially since W. Bush and the terror wars of this century. But even just go back to the end of the Cold War. Like in my book, Provoked, I tell the story of everything that's happened since then in terms of expanding the empire in Europe. And, oh my God, the amount of money we would have saved if the government, if the population then had just listened to Pat Buchanan and Ron Paul and just said, look, the commies are gone. Thank goodness. Now we can come home. The liberals and the leftists all said this too. They wanted their peace dividend, right? And instead the vested interest, especially led by the neoconservatives and the Israel lobby and the military industrial complex and the Pentagon itself, they said, no, we don't want to come home. Now that the Soviet Union is gone, that doesn't mean now we can come home. That means now we can expand into what used to be their territory, and there's no one to stop us. And they just got us on this absolutely horrible path. But just think of the amount of money that could have been made if that money that we blew on the world empire, $20 trillion over the last couple generations here, if all that money had just been spent investing in our own society, and I'm not saying taxes spent on infrastructure, I just mean let the people keep the money, invest in businesses. The opportunity cost of not just $20 trillion gone, but what that $20 trillion could have gone to instead, and the amount of real wealth that would have been produced as a result of that reinvestment in our society, it's incalculable, man. It's embarrassing to see. And I know there's a lot of eminent domain, a lot of central planning, a lot of politicized spending here too, but you look at China and you see some of the new cities that they've built just in the last generation. They built entirely new megalopolises. I mean, it's incredible. And, with very space age, high tech downtowns and super fast trains and all these things. And we're like living in the ghetto in the United States of America. Like, where is our Jetsons future? They blew it killing Iraqis, right? They misspent it all on this world hegemony that we didn't need to do at all. That's been totally destructive. And the fact that we have this proxy war going on in Ukraine right now proves that everyone who said we shouldn't do this was right. And everyone who said, no, don't worry about it, it'll be fine, was wrong. This is what the danger was. That was predicted. If we keep doing this, well, what are we going to do in Ukraine? We're going to bring Ukraine into NATO? They got millions of Russians there. What is the fucking thing then? That was what they said for 30 years, and then they did it anyway, which proves that the naysayers were right and the people who supported it were wrong. And, I mean, that'd be, to me, the first step. Do you remember back in 2014, that I know you remember, your audience all remembers that famous picture of the long line of Toyota Hilux pickup trucks full of Islamic State bin Ladenite fighters in their ninja costumes rolling into Mosul in northwestern Iraq, conquering it and creating the Islamic State Caliphate in the June of 2014. And this guy Baghdadi, who might as well have been bin Laden or Zarqawi, same thing. He got up there on the balcony at the mosque like he's half bin Laden, half Mussolini, and he declares himself the Caliph Ibrahim, ruler of the Islamic State Caliphate. And at that moment, what happened was millions of Americans who had supported Bush's policy, this is now halfway through Obama, right? Millions of people went, and especially guys who had fought in the war over there, they went, well, what the hell?
Yep.
What was it all for if this is the result of it all? Like, I heard guys say that, man, we liberated Ramadi from the bin Ladenites. Now it's taken over again. Well, that was in 15, but still. Samarra, Tikrit, whatever. We fought our asses off into Crete, and now the Islamic State rules it. And then they had to launch Iraq War III, where America literally allied with Iran's Quds Force to help kick the bin Ladenites out. And so many, especially Republicans, said, well, just F me, man. Like, what are we doing? What was this all for? Why? Dang, maybe they don't want to probably admit this part out loud, but maybe all those people who said that George Bush was actually not smart and did not know what he was doing and was actually mean and cruel and stupid and destined to do the wrong thing. In fact, maybe they had a real point. Maybe we shouldn't have done this at all. I mean, what can you do? Again, that picture, that long train of Helix pickup trucks. Everybody knows Hillary Clinton bought those trucks for these bin Ladenites fighting in Syria on the other side of the line. That's where the caliphate came from. At some point, you got to just admit that you were stupid, man. You know what? Blame it on your youth. Blame it on your alcoholism. Blame it on your next door neighbor who also was wrong and influenced you to believe these wrong things. But admit it. We should not have done that, right? Now, by 2014, a lot of guys were ready to admit, fine, well, what can I say? Obviously, we should not have done that. Obviously, we would be better off if Uday and Qusay were here, not bin Ladenite lunatic head choppers, right? An endless civil war in Iraq and all of this stuff. Well, it's the same thing for the whole empire. Come on. You're a tough guy. Admit it. You were stupid and wrong and believed lies, and now you don't have to anymore. Like, I don't mean to be too lectury or whatever, but like for the people, because that was the question, for the people who are stuck on this, but nothing. That's the whole thing of it. There's a great quote of Abraham Lincoln where he says, all of the armies of Europe and Asia combined in an invasion force of the United States could not take a drink from the St. Lawrence River or make a track on the Blue Ridge Mountains in a trial of 1,000 years. No, if America is to die and lose its liberty, we will die by suicide. We'll live forever, or we will die by suicide. No foreign nation could threaten us. And in fact, think about that. It's not just that, Abraham Lincoln said that. Imagine all the armies of Europe trying to invade the United States of America. Do you think they could get to the St. Lawrence River? Do you think they could make a track on the Blue Ridge Mountains? Or no, we would shoot them all to death and they would die horrible, bloody gunshot wound deaths and artillery explosions and the rest. And then they would not drink from our river and they would not make their tracks on our mountains. We are not threatened by anyone. No one would dare. No combination of powers on the earth would dare try to take on the United States of America, which is, of course, a huge part of why our government acts this way, because they know they can rampage throughout Eurasia. And what are they going to do? Sneak into our country and hijack some airliners and crash them into our towers or something? There's no military force that they can bring to bear against us. So we can bring our military force to bear against them wherever we want with impunity. And they can't do nothing about it. That's that sit back and laugh when that GDP to debt ratio gets so out of control that the whole thing just falls apart. Ultimately, there are iron laws of the universe that inflationary money and armed force cannot prevent from taking hold, And which, by the way, back to that earlier thing, was better than suffering total imperial collapse would be if we could all just wise up and listen to Dr. Paul, admit where we were wrong to support the terrible policies that we shouldn't have supported, because I think that's probably necessary, not like for anybody else's ego, but the point being that so we can recognize what we should not have been doing here. We need a new consensus. The whole world empire, really since the end of the Cold War, forget since World War II and all that, but since the end of the Cold War, we should not have been doing this. We didn't need to expand the empire in Asia. We didn't need to expand the empire in Europe. We didn't need to expand the empire in the Middle East at all, which means it's safe to come home now too. And the worst that can happen is nothing.
Yeah, and it just makes me think of J.D. Vance, just recently, Iran, they're the state sponsor of terror, and, we just get people hyped up again. It's just like, it doesn't matter who's in power. It's just the same, like you said, the last couple of generations. It's just like whoever put in power there, it's just the same talking points over and over again. Other than loss of confidence, which would generally be hyperinflation, loss of confidence in the dollar itself, which is how we get hyperinflations. How do you see things playing out? Like, what's the recipe to maybe other than believing Ron Paul? Because again, it just goes back to like, I look across like generation after generation, 100 years of government-run schooling, teaching us nothing of actual value. You look at the fiat currency is actively putting people on the hamster wheel because of inflation, so they can't even get off the hamster wheel and have time to even look to see what's happening. Is it just Max Payne? Is it just things collapse? Is like how do you really see things playing out going forward, and how do we get the train back on the tracks?
Man, I really don't know. Like, I really don't have good answers for that. I can tell you that I'm very optimistic. Well, I'm heartened by the anti-war feeling on the right, even while Trump is leading the other way. Mm-hmm. Obviously, people then get very torn. Partisanship is the mind killer, man, a lot of times. And what are you siding with the other side? As long as that's there, that's very powerful. And yet the polls show, there was a new poll that we ran on antiwar.com last week that showed only 40% of Republicans support attacking Iran. So
wow.
that is a solid 10 points less than half. Right? 11 points less than a majority. Wow, yeah. While a Republican president is sitting in the chair saying, let's go, they're dangerous, we got to do something about it. And they're going, no, man, you promised to not do that. That's what we want to not do. You said all these anti-war things. No new war.
Right.
Yeah. So that is great, man. When W. Bush was going into Iraq based on all the lies back then, it was like 70% support. And the guilt trip was profound to support that war. Otherwise you hate the soldiers and want them all to die or whatever. The way that they phrased the whole thing was crazy. But they really pulled off building a consensus for that thing and implicating the American people in it. Well, you're the ones who wanted us to do this kind of crap, and it's just not true here. It's just here you have, not even just the war party, but the Israelis and their agents in America want us to do this. Nobody else wants this to happen. Now, there are people, in fact, in that same poll, there were 35% said don't know, right? So they're afraid to commit against the president. They still will not go ahead and support him on it. You know what I mean? So you just have nothing and then overall it's like 70-something%. If you include the Democrats and independents or whatever, overall it's like 70-something% of the population is against doing this. And it sort of reminds me of Syria
from 20 years ago.
Yeah. I mean, okay, so in the summer of 2013, they had the first big fake sarin attack in Damascus. That was supposed to lead to war. And just people absolutely reacted against it and refused to go along with it. And, you had all these soldiers who, the effort was really led by Breitbart, by Bannon and Breitbart for whatever reason, because he's such a pro-Zionist. I'm not sure why he did this, but he led the charge for this. And they would hold up these signs that said, I didn't join the Navy or I didn't join the Marines to fight a civil war for Al-Qaeda in Syria. And it was like a serious kind of viral AWOL type of a moment where people were really objecting to it. And the American people were calling their congressmen. And look, Obama was the commander in chief at the time. So Republicans were just like, look, man, we're not following this guy into battle right now. We're just not. We won't. And the calls to Congress were virtually unanimous against it. And at that time, then it was like, okay, wow. So if they really failed to rally public opinion around this thing, I remember Jake Tapper, desperate on CNN. What can the president do to convince Americans to support this? Well, why is that the framing? How about what can the American people do to convince the president that they don't want him to do this? Why can't that be the frame? Jake Tapper, who is obviously an Israeli agent with the rest of them. Well, the thing is, at that time, even like the Council on Foreign Relations wasn't really behind it. And there's some neocons there. But basically, it was just the Israel lobby. Who wants war with Syria? Well, the American Israel Public Affairs Committee wants war with Israel. And Bill Kristol wants war with Israel. And the Washington Institute for Near East Policy wants war with Israel. The Center for with Syria for Israel. The Center for Security Policy. But that was it, right? The Jewish Institute for National Security Affairs. But you look around, nobody else. It's like Will Ferrell in Old School, where he's all drunk, streaking down the street, and he's like, "Come on, everybody!" But there's nobody behind him.
Everybody's doing it. Everybody's doing it.
That's right. It's just the Israelis and their fifth column in our country, and it's the same kind of thing here. Where it's like, well, Ben Shapiro says forward march. Well, no, I don't think so. I don't think that squeaky little dork gets to be the boss of the conservative movement. Why should he be? Why should anyone have to listen to him? And does anyone think that Ben Shapiro cares about America or what's good for America, what happens to America? American interests, broadly defined. No, he's an Israeli Zionim. He is their agent, and his job is to use you. I hope you can tell. I think you can, right? And I think that, to me, is the silver lining on this, at least, is this is really going to help to finally finish off American support for Israel if Trump does this. And people are so fed up. On the American left, it's just over. Absolutely. After the last 2 years of absolutely horrific slaughter in the Gaza Strip. And on the right, it's still a huge swing. It's something like 50-50. And where everybody under the age of 50 is good on this. So everybody older than that is dying sooner, man, by definition. And, you know, they are not going to be able to maintain their narrative. And especially here, if they get away with coercing Trump into launching this absolutely unprovoked aggressive war, which it really is. You know, I wrote the book Provoked about how Washington got Ukraine into the war with Russia. It's might sound hypocritical of me to use that phrase or whatever, but like literally the Ayatollah does not want to fight us. The Ayatollah's not doing like Biden and going, hey, that'd be funny if this happened. You know what I mean? He's not doing that. He is, look, man, I'm not giving up I'm not giving up my centrifuges, and I'm not giving up my missiles. But that's not a threat to the United States of America. He is in no way threatening the United States of America. This is the furthest thing from a legitimate excuse for war. I mean, hell, at least Bush worked hard to fill your dad's head full of lies about what danger America was in here. Here it's like, you are not allowed to have missiles that can reach Israel. And you're not allowed to have an enrichment program at all, because Israel thinks that that's basically the same thing as you having nuclear weapons, and they don't want that. So we have amassed the largest American armada in the region since 2003 to enforce Israel's commands. I mean, literally, Netanyahu comes to town, and as he's getting on the plane to leave, I don't know if it's, okay, that figuratively, very, very, very close in the timeline, Trump orders another aircraft carrier to the Middle East. Like, we can go ahead and start referring to Benjamin Netanyahu as the American sovereign here, Supreme Commander Netanyahu, who is higher in rank than Donald Trump, the president of the United States. I mean, what do you call it? He's in charge here. And that's sure what it looks like. But I'll tell you, I guess I should concede that there is a slight, I guess, but a possibility that the Ayatollah will fight this war the same way he fought the war in June, which is hit Israel a few times, but not try to anger Donald Trump. Last June, he could have fired all his missiles at our bases in Iraq and Kuwait and Bahrain and Qatar and killed thousands and thousands and thousands of Americans and said, don't you mess with me. But he didn't do that. He fired 14 missiles, and as Trump praised him on the internet, he called ahead of time and said, we're about to fire 14 missiles at this base in Qatar. Please shoot them down as best you can. Because he had to do something to save a little bit of face, right? But that was it. And the absolute minimum necessary to save face. But I think he's probably rightfully terrified of Donald Trump. And he does have the capability, Iran does have the capability of reaching out and touching our guys in the region. They can overwhelm our missile defenses in volume. They can do that. But the Ayatollah knows that Donald Trump is loco. And if he destroyed our airbase in Qatar, I think the Ayatollah thinks that Trump might nuke Tehran, or at least their naval bases on the coast or something.
Which,
right?
yeah.
He might get really, really, really upset. And you don't want to see Donald Trump really, really, really upset. And I think they know that. And, you know, so there's all this talk about, oh, they will definitely hit back with everything they have. I don't think that's necessarily true. And I think especially last June gives us reason to doubt that. On the other hand, they weren't trying to kill the Ayatollah last June. And if they really are going for a full regime change and trying to completely destroy the government there, then that's a different question. And they very well might issue the command to fire every last missile they got. And that could really lead to catastrophe in the region. You know, Saddam Hussein had no such ability to reach out and touch our guys in the Gulf whatsoever, like Iran does right now. And so this is one thing that I think is weighing on Trump. There have been leaks like this, and it has to be that he's afraid of failure. What if he starts this war and it gets out of hand, and then he doesn't have escalation dominance in the war where we get to dictate the pace of the war and the direction of the war at all times? What if Hezbollah starts blowing up, you know, American political and economic targets across Europe? What if our guys get blown the hell out of at our 5th Fleet Naval Station in Bahrain? Right? Then what does he do? He's got to be able to think at least 1 or 2 steps ahead on that. Like Mike Tyson says, boy, when you get in a real fist fight, plans go out the window. You better have good training. You better really know like what to do instinctually in the event of A, B, C, D, E, F, and G, or you're going to get knocked the hell out, man. And so, you know, he has to be taking that into account. He has to be taking into account the fact that the American people don't want this. The question is like, can he get away with it or not in terms of American opinion about that? And this is the role that we can play. And it's a marginal difference, but the margin is where all the action is let our voices be heard, that we do not want this. You know, this is part of what happened in Syria in 2013. The phone was ringing off the hook at the White House and at the Congress, House and Senate. The phone would not stop ringing, and people were saying, we don't want to do this. And they were like, God dang, man. I didn't know people really cared that much, but they really do. And their total consensus against this. It matters whether that's true or not. Doesn't mean, oh, they are our humble servants, but it means that they do have to consider whether we will absolutely hate them and destroy anyone associated with this thing in their political careers, you know, going forward and that kind of thing about this. And so that is definitely part of the calculation that they have to weigh here. And there is a real danger, man. If they really feel like the government is going to fall, they might launch everything they got. And I guess say too that I think there's a very small chance of this, but there's a very small chance that they have an atom bomb at all. But there is a greater chance that they have begun to try to make a nuke in the last months since June. Now, I don't believe that, and I don't have any real indication of that, other than they said, we still have enriched uranium that we got, and we're going to keep enriching it. They didn't say that they're enriching it to weapons grade or they're going to make a nuke out of it. But what they had before was a latent deterrent, and then we called their bluff. So what do you do now, right? You either say, okay, well, you called my bluff. I guess I'm helpless. Or you go ahead and make the nuke that you were implying you were threatening to make, you know, if we attacked. So there is a chance. Although, by the way, Donald Trump did say recently that, I guess, you know, intelligence came to him and said, hey, they're digging a new tunnel to restart their program to continue enriching somewhere. And that he said, call them up and tell them we know it and we'll bomb the hell out of them if they continue. He wrote about this on True Social or whatever. He put out a tweet about this. Or maybe it was an interview. Forgive me. I think it was a TV interview where he said this. He's like, I called them up and I told them, don't you do it or I'll bomb you. And they were like, okay. Something like that. You know, he always like tries to kind of reenact the story, like play all he doesn't do the voices.
Use all the characters.
Yeah, he like does each character in the script. I told them, don't you do that. And they said, okay, we won't do that. And then I said, yeah, you better not, or whatever it was.
Unreal.
I don't know. Is there going to be a war tomorrow? I don't know. I mean, when one side has no interest in fighting whatsoever, and the question is our side going to start a war for no good reason whatsoever, and for only reasons as dictated to us by a foreign power? And while we have the biggest buildup of military forces, oh, I know. I'm sorry. One more tangent I was going to say too. along the lines of Trump fearing the consequences here. There's an article in today's Wall Street Journal that says one of their plans is to do some limited strikes and then tell the Ayatollah, you better not do anything. And if you do anything, then we'll escalate. So they're already, that's part of his fear, right? Is he's afraid it's going to get out of control. So he's sort of pitching to them in advance. If you want, we can keep this at a low level. I'm going to bomb you. You better sit there and take it. And if you don't, then I'm going to bomb you even more. This is the Journal today. So, I mean, it sure that sure makes it sound like they're really serious or really looking for ways to satisfy Trump's anxiety here. Try to come up with a way to do this. I don't know.
It's incredible. I literally have like 100 more things I want to talk to you about. So we're going to have to do this again later this year, whatever, a few months or something like that. Cause I know there's gonna be a lot more to talk about at that time. So we need to have you back. Where can people find you? And maybe you have many books you've written, Fool's Errand, people can see it back there enough already. What's the best book? Maybe people can just like, hey, how can I learn more about Scott and like what he's about? Maybe the one book they should go check first. And where can people find you?
Sure. Okay. Well, you can see enough already back there. That's my book on the Middle East, and it's shorter. Provoked is much longer. That's my book about the empire in Eastern Europe and how it led to the war in Ukraine. Which is in there too. And I'm not sure, is Fool's Errand back there? Some of my other guys' books back there. Fool's Errand is my book about the war in Afghanistan. That was my first book. So if you're interested in that stuff, also, I got the brand new Scott Horton Academy of Foreign Policy and Freedom. And this is with me and other experts taking you through these courses, essentially walking you through the history of American foreign policy in the Middle East and Eastern Europe are my courses. We've got Ramsey Baroud on Palestine and a bunch of other guys, including Debunking Christian Zionism, and a bunch of other really great courses. And so that's all at scotthortonacademy.com. And otherwise, I've got a show, The Scott Horton Show, and another show called Provoked with my co-host, Daryl Cooper. And I'm at antiwar.com and libertarianinstitute.org. And really, if you just go to my X account, at Scott Horton Show, then I have all my links there. And there's a bunch of them. But you can catch up on all my stuff there.
Amazing. Thank you so much for your generosity, for your time, Scott. I can't wait to do it again. I appreciate you being on.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
If you like that episode, then you're going to love the playlist we put together for you with our most recent podcast with the top Bitcoiners, sound money, liberty advocates in the world. Go check those out here. We'll see you inside. You're going to love them.